So by training, I'm an engineer, but the industrial type. And then I studied energy planning. So believe it or not, energy planning in the 80s at UPenn. So you can imagine Philadelphia in the 80s. So the reason why we're talking about culture, about the city, is because as local Newars, so we call ourselves Newars. So this is our city where for thousands of years, we've had a way of life, right? A way of life, and in that way of life, a lot of things have to do with, the geology, the soil, the way the valley is structured, and so it is almost like a second instinct for us, to understand these things. And so, sometimes a lot of people ask, why do you know so much about culture? And the reason is because I grew up in an artisan family, and so my surname Chitrakar means I come from the painting guild, and you can imagine how many minerals painters use, and so I'll show you, some of that as well. So these semi-precious minerals that are used to create these amazing, paintings, right? And so, we'll weave this story, together. So we have almost till lunchtime, by which time we'll be in the museum, and for a good lunch. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is start by asking you a very simple question, because I think your whole time in Nepal should be about how you frame your questions, right? Not the answers you get, but how you frame your questions. Okay. So when you arrive in a country like Nepal, if somebody was to ask you, why are people with dogs and cats rich and people with buffaloes and cows poor? Any thoughts? Like when we say poverty, you show somebody with buffaloes, right? And if you want to show somebody rich, you show them with dogs and cats. Why do we do this? It's a wake-up call, yeah.
I think the latter two produce things, whereas like cats and dogs are like they're just kind of pets. They don't really.
Yeah, and so who should be richer?
The people with the dogs and cats.
Cats.
Yeah.
So is it an indication of wealth, or is it an indication, that they're not productive?
Mm-hmm.
So are cows and buffaloes better, or are dogs and cats better?
Like it's hard to say one's better.
So the point here is, when we cross over the other side, right? And so my professor would say Nepal's GDP per capita is this much, right? A number. So I raised my hand and I said, I'll give you that much money. You go to Nepal and survive for 1 year, and then I'll believe you, because that number makes no sense to me. Either it's just a number we discuss in the classroom, but it doesn't, basically explain the fact that 30 million Nepalese are doing quite well with their cows and buffaloes. The fact that it doesn't figure in your GDP calculation is your problem. But milk is milk, right? Farm is farm, food is food. So I think, one of the things you'll notice, on your travel, is that you'll have to challenge a lot of the paradigms, that you've grown up with, because those are not the paradigms we use in this part of the world. So in this part of the world, having cows and buffaloes, would actually be an indicator of wealth. It will show how wealthy you are, right? And so these kinds of notions really have to be challenged, because, Nepalese get really irritated when you just put in a label, and the world has created, many of these boxes, and so they put you into this box, and somehow you're supposed to fit into that box. And so that's the way we want to start learning, right? And so using the time in Nepal, really to open up our mind, about other parts of the world. So the second question I had was, why does Nepal have so many communists? Did you think about that? Why does Nepal always have a communist party, a Maoist prime minister? Do you think Nepalese are communists? No. And so it's probably, I had to write a piece on the Nepali Times, and I wrote that in the 1950s, when there were very few books, available to read. Believe me, the Chinese, the Soviets, and the now North Koreans, dumped the market with a lot of communist propaganda. And so if that was the only reading material available in the market, probably that's what people got influenced with, right? It could be one justification, for why people would call themselves a communist, right? But we'll see, in our conversation, how we can somehow, see how these things also play into our understanding of Nepal. So, does Nepal have too many tigers and rhinos? So Nepal has just tripled the tiger population, and we've got rhinos now at 1953 levels. Do you think we have too many? What do you think we do with extra rhinos and tigers now? So anybody from San Diego? Yeah, yeah. Have you seen our rhinos?
Born there.
Have you seen our rhinos in San Diego?
In the zoo?
At the zoo. Yeah. So so we have so many now. We're flying them, around the world, to put them in zoological park. So there's 2 pairs in Shanghai, a pair in Cologne, a pair in London, a pair in Shanghai, 1 pair in the National Zoo in Washington D.C. So they're all gifts, from the state. And so again, country like Nepal, setting aside 23% of its land area for biodiversity conservation and a 45% forest cover. So as you go through Nepal, you'll be quite surprised at how a poor country that has buffaloes and cows is willing to set aside 45% of its land area to preserve nature. And so what is the average US area under protection?
Not that high.
Not much, right? So this is how you should use Google, is to say if Nepal can set aside 45%, how much does the US set aside? And so it's a good way to learn about yourself. So when you travel, one of the biggest benefits of traveling is not to learn about Nepal or to become an expert on Nepal, but to reflect on your own place, your own city, your own place. And so this learning, I think when we say world learning, I think the biggest value that we can create is not for you to become a Nepal expert in a few weeks, but to see the world and then reflect on yourself. And so it's something that we'd really also like to encourage. So what I'm going to do is just give you a little background so that as we walk, we'll try to answer as many of these questions. And so we would draw India and then Sri Lanka somewhere down here. And so if you think of this landscape, it's very important to look at it in an isometric view, so like a 15-degree tilted angle. Now why is that map very important? So instead of doing a flat map, why would a Nepali always try to do a sort of a 3D map?
Long terrain.
And Nepal has no area. We have volume. So right now, as we speak, we are standing at 1400 meters above sea level. So if you were to iron out Nepal, how big would it be? If you took a nice iron and ironed out Nepal, it would be pretty big, right? So one thing you're going to learn in your travel is that these countries don't have area, but they have volume. So what that means is every step is going to be either up or down. There is no such thing as forward and backward, right? So you'll go up and down. Now in this geography, so all the rivers, let us say there is a lake here called Mansarovar and a beautiful mountain called Kailas, and so all these rivers that originate from here, so they flow and then ultimately into the Bay of Bengal, right? So when a Bangladeshi friend complains that all the flood in Bangladesh, as you'll see tonight on the TV, is because of soil erosion in the Himalayas. What is the Nepali response to that? How does the Nepali respond to a Bangladeshi complaining that we have floods because of soil erosion in the
Well, without the rivers from Nepal,
So they would not get any water, very good. But what else? Even more profound. So if it wasn't for soil erosion in Nepal, there would be no Bangladesh. So stop complaining, right? I mean, it's millions of years of soil erosion that created Bangladesh in the first place. So then what are you complaining about, right? So again, what do you expect to see as you travel? A lot of mass debris, right? A lot of things flowing down. Why do you think we have such good flow, such high flow, able to carry all that silt all the way to the Bay of Bengal? And so there again, another map I wanted to keep in mind is the Tibetan Plateau, which is about 3,800 meters, right? So you go up to Mount Everest, or Sagarmatha as we call it, 8848. Now remember this, 0.86 after the earthquake. Yeah? Then you have 3 ranges you will travel through: the Mahabharat, the Shiva Lake, and the Chure, and then the Gangetic Plain. Right? So look at that gradient. So the Gangetic Plain would be about 80 meters above sea level, and this will be. And can you imagine Nepal does this in a span of about 250 kilometers? Must be the steepest country in the world, right? So everything goes down. And so our whole narrative of trying to understand Nepal, of trying to understand society, is based on that 3D, cross section, and never a flat map of Nepal. So somehow a flat map of Nepal will never explain Nepal to you, right? So it's got to be 3D. Now, in this map, so this is how we have to understand Nepal, is that we currently have a narrative that the water flows down, then the soil flows down, and then young people flow down. Yeah, does it make sense?
Yeah.
So the water goes, the soil goes, and the next thing you know, the young people go. So Modi, the Indian Prime Minister, has a very nice sentence to describe Nepal. He said, "Jal aur jawani, pahad mein kuch kaam nahi aata." He says water and youth can never be retained in the hills. So both will flow down. So what are you going to notice when you travel through Nepali villages? Yes or no? So you'll see a lot of old people. And so where are the young people today? So on the flight, did you meet a lot of young Nepalese? And so can you imagine, out of a country of 30 million today, 1 in 4 Nepalese is currently working outside of Nepal. 1 in 4. Now, when you step outside, you see a thriving marketplace where mobile phones, watches, luxury goods, everything is being bought and sold. Why? Try to link it with that. Young people going out. What do? They earn and they send a lot of money home. And so can you imagine Nepal's GDP, almost 1/4 is remittance sent by young people back home. So a huge amount of cash in the economy. And so we have a country where Nepal is never short of foreign currency. So in fact we have a surplus in foreign currency, and Nepal has never defaulted on its international debt because of this remittance flow into the country. So again, just a number like that, does it set your expectations of what you might notice in the village? There's a lot of older people, and then you ask where are the young people, and so the answer will be, so it could be Dubai, it could be Saudi Arabia, right? Yeah, right. And then as you go up the academic ladder, so where would they go? So 60,000 in the last 6 years have gone to Australia. Now why would Australia be the preferred place for young people? Because Australia allows Nepalese to work 25 hours a week. And so it's a preferred place. And 17,000 in the last 6 years have joined US universities. 17,000. So one of the things, the narrative in Nepal is that those who went to the US and Australia may not come back. And yet for Nepalese, 67,000 out of 30 million is not a big issue, right? Because the millions who have gone to Saudi Arabia are coming back. The millions who have gone to Kuwait are coming back. And so somehow the new Nepal that we see is not being built by people coming back from Australia or US. They're coming back from Saudi Arabia. So after working for 5 or 6 years, they don't want to stay in Saudi Arabia. Or when the World Cup stadiums were built, the Qatari government didn't keep the Nepalese, so they sent them back. And so you see a lot of these conversations in Nepali villages, and so it'll give you an idea for where we are at, right? So does it make sense? I hope you're all waking up to. So it's just a way, for learning. I think we always have to frame the questions right. If we frame the questions right, then the answer, will also be something that is useful. So another question here is, so this part of the geography. So this is India, and so this is Tibet, and this is China, right? So just a quick, history. So history is a good way to also understand, the landscape. So imagine 644 AD, right? So this landscape, and in 644 AD, if you can imagine or visualize, that Tibet was the most powerful country in this part of the world, and so everybody was trying to make peace with Tibet, right? So the Nepalese, also did this by marrying into the Tibetan household. And so the Tibetan king, basically through this wife, adopted Buddhism. And so Tibet became Buddhist in the 7th century. So before that, they practiced Bompo as a religion. But what this did, this wedding did, was basically open up the trade route between Tibet and Nepal. Right? So the trade route opened up, and so this trade became extremely profitable. Now, so try to understand, right? You come from different backgrounds, but if you learn together, you'll see each one can help each other to understand these issues. So in a US business, what are some of the variables that make that business very profitable? Well, why would a business be really profitable, versus a not so profitable business? What are some variables? Yeah, come on, think like a businessman now. Yes.
I was just reading this yesterday that like the U.S. has more like service economy.
Very good. Yeah.
Whereas like countries that are more like developing have more like industrial.
Very good. Manufacturing. Yeah. So one is services. What else? So a service-oriented country, would have successful businesses versus manufacturing. Very good. What do they teach you about the three things that needs to happen for a successful business? So the three would be location, location, and location, right? Isn't that how McDonald's became rich? So look at this location. Does it help to have control over the currency? Right? So if you can manage the currency. So look at this: services, location, the currency. What else do you think might make sense here? So one of the things that we'll look at is this trans-Himalayan trade, flourished because, now look at this, services as in the Kathmandu Valley, which is located in the Himalayas, produces so much food. So it's such a food surplus valley that everybody would come here and wait. Right? So plenty of food, so services were available for traders. And then combine that with the location. So imagine what happened to Nepal was, you had to wait for the snow to melt to cross into Tibet. Then you had to wait for the malaria to subside to cross into India. So I hope you understand what location means. So by being located between the malaria-infested jungle to the south and the snow-capped mountains to the north, we monopolized the entire trade. And the services were basically, you could wait it out in Kathmandu. So Kathmandu's prosperity comes from that ability. Now, the currency that was used for the trade was also minted in Kathmandu. And so on the walk, I'll show you the minting families that used to mint the currency. Now look at this, language. So the mother tongue that I speak, the Nevari that I speak, is the language that was used as the script on the trade route. So imagine you have currency, you have language, you have a great location, so it flourished, right? So now look at this, 1600. You will become historians after this. What happened in 1600 in the UK, in Britain, that changed the history of South Asia? So who came to power in 1600 in the UK? A little beyond geology, but it's good to know. So if I said Kate Blanchett, does it make sense? Who? Very good. Elizabeth Wu, which one? Which Elizabeth? The first. The second one died recently, but the first. So Elizabeth I became Queen of England. And what did she do that changed the history of South Asia? Very good. So she opened up the East India Company. And the East India Company arrives in India to trade. And guess what? They have their eyes on the lucrative trade that the Nepalese are managing. So from 1600 all the way to 1947 when India became independent, what did Nepal do beyond the trade? We had to go to war with the British. Now, question, why does Nepal not celebrate Independence Day? Why is there no Independence Day in Nepal? Because we beat the British, because we beat the British every Easter. Nepal never became a colony. And so this is a huge pride that Nepalese take, because many countries got colonized. Nepal never got colonized, so we don't have Independence Day. It's something that Nepalese take great pride in. But the point is, the price we paid was very heavy. So the price we paid was that we became landlocked. Right? And so this very prosperous country now becomes poor because there is no more trade revenue. So now, when you walk around, what will you see? You'll see temples, you'll see monuments, and then those are the results of prosperity. But what about the poverty? The poverty is the result of the fact that we lost the trade revenue. Until 1947, this country just solely relied on agriculture as a source of income. So trade is something that we really need to understand. Why? Because I think there is a president who doesn't understand trade. Right? So my children were asking me, how do tariffs work in the Trump era? And so I told them, the butcher brings meat to our house. And so, I tell my children, the butcher didn't buy anything from us, so let's put some tariff on the meat. Not a very good way to become rich. Huh? So it's very easy to sometimes understand these things, but probably quite complex for some people to make sense. So Nepal became poor, and then, look at this, 1947. So 1947 up to 2025, when we are talking now. So this country also went through a phase where the whole world, fell in love with Nepal. And so the Americans were the first ones in Nepal, and so they helped eradicate malaria. They established the first forestry school, the first agriculture schools, right? So people like me, anybody watch on YouTube the Nixon and Kennedy debate in 1961? So this first televised debate where Kennedy and Nixon are debating, and so Kennedy comes up with this plan that we need to go out into the world, get their best to come to universities in the USA, so that they can, go and tell the world who Americans really are. So it's your tax money that paid me to go to UPenn, under that same program. So there's a whole generation of us that benefited, from that program of going to the US to study. And so Nepal goes through this period where there's a lot of foreign aid in this country. Now, to a point where Nepalese have actually started realizing that this overcrowds local initiatives, because nothing can compete with free, right? And then the second is it has created a level of dependency that you get really irritated, when you hear how dependent Nepalese have become to foreign aid. And so the geopolitics of Nepal is such that everybody wants to be here. So the Indians are here, the Chinese are here, everybody's here, right? And so each and every time Nepal says we have a problem, the whole world rushes to help. And that's not helped Nepal at all. It's created a huge dependency, that somehow we don't have to solve our own problem. Somehow it is the world's problem to solve Nepal's problem. So this is something that we are trying to wean ourselves away from. And so the way we are doing this is in 2026, next year. So Nepal is declaring itself a middle income country. And so part of that declaration is to basically stop charities from working in Nepal, because we don't need free anymore. So we need to become more entrepreneurial. And so in the walk, what I want to show you is why do we keep on rebuilding and showing these assets? Because we can show young people who we were and what we can be. Right? Now in that process, look at the location again. So Nepal is strategically located between about 2.5 billion people. So the market in our neighborhood is huge. Right? So one of the areas in which we thought we have a competitive advantage is water. So look at this. So the water that flows, has a huge potential, and so to convert that into hydroelectric project is easy. So today Nepal is in a position where the slogan that we are using for our hydropower is very amazing. It's, to basically power the Asian century. It's not an easy slogan, right? Powering the Asian century. Why? Because we think the Nepali hydropower can actually decarbonize, this part of the world. So it's a huge thing. Now, Nepal has the asset. The market is all around. So if the Chinese and the Indians, everybody invested, then we could actually, move away from fossil fuel. So we've now started exporting energy to India, and now we export it all the way to Bangladesh. But then look at the geopolitics. So geopolitics is such that the water becomes a big issue because it is contagious in terms of where it flows, how much flows, all this. So let us say India is down here. So in the negotiations, what will happen? In the negotiations, Nepal will take a stand that if you want to stop 9 months of drought and 3 months of flooding in India, who can help India? Only Nepal can, right? Because we happen to be an upstream country. So water negotiations, become very important. But then if, the Prime Minister Modi says to Pakistan, if you look for trouble with me, I'll stop your water flow. Right? Now look at this. So it's easy for India to say we'll stop the water flow here. But what if Nepal stopped it up there? And then what if Tibet stopped it up there? So water doesn't come from one geography. And yet people will make you believe that if you cut off your water supply, then you'll have to negotiate with us. Right? So this geopolitics keeps on getting into the way of getting South Asia to prosper, but also decarbonize itself in this process. So these little maps like this, or little history like this, will actually help you, to understand, what are you doing. So just a quick thing about, like the politics of this place is, so when you say politics, right, so I just want to write politics. So in Nepal, I like to refer to politics in two ways. So one is the noisy politics, as you will see on the streets. So one section wants the king back, the other wants the republic, and so very noisy. Right? Then we have this very quiet revolution in Nepal. So the noisy and the quiet revolution. So the noisy you can go and join on the streets, and then try to listen to both sides and try to understand what the noisy negotiations are. But let me tell you a little bit about the quiet revolution that we have in this country. So the first one is in 1990 when I headed the IUCN, so it's the World Conservation Union office in Nepal. So Nepal was down to 22.6% forest cover. And so 22.6% forest cover was really dangerous, right, for a country because of soil erosion, all the things that come with deforestation. So in 2025, we have attained 45% forest cover. Now, that's a very silent revolution. Maybe people don't understand why it is happening. And so remember what the Facebook quotations that say, when a tree falls, it makes a lot of noise, but when it grows, it doesn't make any noise. And so this is the analogy of silent and noisy revolutions. So the trees have been growing. So with 45% forest cover, if you look at the map of Nepal, that looks at vulnerability, to climate change, to resilience, all these words. So because of this huge forest cover, so watershed management, water flow, so all these factors that come from basically deforestation, I think Nepal has been able to mitigate. Right? So this is one aspect. So the second aspect is no country in the world can just become rich by managing natural resources. Right? So it must invest in human resources. So if you look at the history of South Korea, so 1962, South Korea was 2 places poorer than Nepal on the Human Development Index. So Korea had just gone through the Korean War, so they were in a really bad state. But today Korea is the 6th largest economy in the world. And so we as Nepalese, we try to say, how did Korea do it? And it's very simple, they invested in people. Right? They invested in human resources. And so if you look at the budget that came out just a couple of days back, so Nepal today invests more than 10% of its annual expenditure on keeping 34,000 schools open across Nepal. Now the enrollment in grade 1 is about 93%, so which is one of the highest in the world, which is very good. But by 10th grade, by 12th grade, we are able to retain only about 56%. So what does that mean? It means we have to work very hard for the next 10 to 12 years. And if we can keep those children in school, then Nepal will be a very different place in about 10 to 12 years. So we're not there yet. So if you look at, when you go to the villages, look at grade 1, look at grade 2, up to 6, maybe 7, very high enrollment. But then the dropout begins. And so economic reasons, many reasons why they drop out. So in eastern Nepal, where I've been working, it's actually 42% boys in class and 56% girls. So there are more girls staying back, finishing school than boys right now, because boys get drawn into the job market quicker. So this is something we need to look at. So we can go through many. Let's take connectivity as something, connectivity. And so if you remember, it took 100 years for the first billion people to say hello on the phone. First, a billion to 100 years. For the second billion, 5 years. So for the second billion people to say hello on the phone, to 5 years. For Nepalese to get smartphones in their pocket, took even less than that. So maybe because of the topography, maybe because of the difficult terrain, so phone connectivity was the easiest way to connect Nepal. And so you will not see a Nepali without a phone. And so sometimes when you do connectivity data, it comes above 100%. You know why? Because many people carry phones with more than one SIM card. 2 or 3 SIM cards, so it always crosses 100% and nobody could figure it out until you realize all these fake phones that come from China and have these multiple SIM cards. And so, we don't call them iPhones, we call them iFans here. Okay. So connectivity. So if you take, health, let us say health. So previously 70 different medicines and services were free of cost to the Nepalese. Now we have increased it to 200. So for example, if you have a rabies bite, then that is on the list. So a rabies vaccine is free. So the COVID vaccine is on the list, so it is free. Now beyond the 200, it's quite expensive to go to a private hospital. And so it's not universal coverage. We have started insurance, but it's not available to everybody yet. But the 200 medicines are. One very interesting piece of data to look at is if you look at population. So 30 years ago, 2.6% was the population growth rate of Nepal, 2.6, which was one of the highest in the world. And so the analysis was why was such a high birth rate taking place, and the analysis showed very simply that the high birth rate was because of high mortality rates. And so when we go to a village and we ask the grandmother, why did you have 10 children? The answer would be because I don't know if they will live. And so 80% of those deaths was because of bad water and bad sanitation. Right? So we invested in water, we invested in sanitation. So 20 years ago, we brought it down to 2.1%. Then we brought it down to 1.4%. And the current population growth rate is 0.92. Not too many countries in the world have been able to do this. Right? So by actually bringing the mortality rate down, to bring the population down. And so, this is how you would need to learn or open your mind in. So if you want to bring the birth rate down, you have to first bring the death rate down. So if dying doesn't stop, birthing doesn't stop. So do you know what is the difference between this time and this time? Geology and statistics don't mix also. What is the time difference called? It's called the lag time. So the time between children not dying and people actually having less children, there is a lag time. So what do you think is the average age of 30 million Nepalese? Given that lag time.
50.
Lower.
30,
30. Go lower.
20.
23. It's one of the youngest countries in the world. Why? Because every child who should have died didn't die. Strange, right? So these graphs are not, something simple. They're quite profound, right? Because the children, the parents would expect them to die, but didn't die, right? And so you have a very young population. So now you have an economy where, when you have a large young population, what happens? So the UK this year issued 40,000 visas for Nepalese to join the National Health Service as nurses. So do you think out-migration is just because of Nepal? No, because many aging populations, many aging countries are looking for countries like Nepal to recruit young people into their workforce. So the South Koreans have just issued 20,000 visas a year for their industrial workforce. So when you go to every street corner, what sign do you see? Korean Language Institute. It's not driven by Nepal, it's driven by the need for South Korea to have young people join their industrial force. Right? So these are things, so in Japanese there's a saying, keep in mind, that even a piece of paper has two sides. Always two sides. And always try to ask and try to find out what that other side is. Right? So it's never one side. So the more we discover the other side, the more learning we can attain. So we can go on and on. So school enrollment, all. Now resilience is something I just wanted to highlight, and so it's easy to fill up a whiteboard very quickly. So you can tell my generation is whiteboard and post-its, and not smartphones. So the word resilience is something we will discuss a lot as we walk. So one is Nepal recovered from the conflict, right? So we had 10 years of armed conflict, and so today Nepal is a thriving, peaceful country because we were able to resolve, that conflict, bring all the warring sides together. It took quite an effort to bring everybody to the table, and then form this constituent assembly that wrote the new constitution for Nepal. And so that took almost 8 years in the process. But today, we have a federal, republic that is functioning. The earthquake is something we will see. So the last earthquake was 2015. The one before that was 1934. The one before that was 1833. So like clockwork, every 100 years, and we'll see how the recovery, process actually takes place with earthquake. We went through a very, difficult blockade by India, economic blockade. And so this was a time when most Nepalese cooked 1 meal a day and survived, but did not bow down to the Indian demand to change the electoral system, whereby the south, which is densely populated, would have more representation than the sparsely populated north. And so this blockade was something very difficult. Then we went through COVID, right? Remember COVID? So it's amazing that when you walk in the city, you think these people have gone through all these things. You can hardly tell, right? So that ability to bounce back, I think, is very uniquely Nepali. And so people don't complain, people don't just get up and go about doing things, right? And so that's something that you should really appreciate in a time that these people have been through a lot, right? And so somehow they've recovered. So just the last point, so we're getting close to when we need to open up the floor. You cannot listen to a grey-haired person for too long. So we have challenges, we have all these things, but what I wanted to do was, before we walk, let me stop just a while and just see if, when you got on the airplane, surely you must have said, if I could ask a question to somebody about Nepal, so I would do it. This is the time before we walk. So ask me what you had in mind when you got on that plane to come to Nepal, or when you were climbing up the staircase. So first of all, were you afraid to get on that airplane? No. You were excited. But surely some questions must have come to mind.
What's your favorite part about Nepal?
My favorite part? So I travel quite a bit, right? So last week I was in Chitwan National Park, and so I served on the WWF board. And so we're looking at the national parks that we created in 1972. And so if you look at the forest, it's in really good quality. If you look at the species, they're in really good state. In fact, the amount of food available to the tigers, the rhinos, so it's really good. So it will rise. But then the overpopulation in these big species has created human conflict, human-animal conflict. And so can you imagine in Barrier National Park, just west of Chitwan, to far west, children cannot go to school on bicycle or walking anymore. We have to ferry them in buses. Because the one thing we don't want is a tiger killing a child. So what is exciting or fun in Nepal is there is no exit strategy. There is no such thing as the tiger is tripling, so we're okay. There is no such thing. And so to get up in the morning and to face another challenge.
That's your favorite part?
That's my favorite part. So every time you pick up the phone or check your email, there's probably something that needs to be fixed. People have this notion, right? There's an exit somewhere, and you can exit. Doesn't exist. What else? Just thoughts or anything that you had in mind when you chose to come to Nepal. Huh? Yeah, please. Oh, just comment. Doesn't have to be a question. Yeah.
I guess I was curious for the people my age, just like how their life was, like what was school like.
Yeah. So I think for that demography, the world is a level playing field, right? Level in many senses, because a movie being released or a song being released So my children, so my son is an architect, my daughter-in-law is a housing engineer, and my daughter is a Le Cordon Bleu chef, French chef. So if you think of an average Nepali family, that's not average, right? So it'd be a little above average when you have a family like that. But for that generation, I think they've grown up in a very level world because they had opportunities and they took those opportunities and now they're at par in the weather. So my son might be working on his laptop, but he might be doing a house in Vermont. So my daughter is approving the building, code for a insurance company in Texas. And my daughter is basically, at any time, she takes about 4 or 5 restaurants and bakeries that are not doing well, takes over the management, turns them into profit, and hands them back in Kathmandu. So yeah, she's creating these what you call fine dining experiences out of local food. And I'm sure before you leave, you'll try some of that, like dry thane.
Oh yeah, we had last week with the group.
Yeah,
There,
yeah. So a lot of good things. So I think that generation wouldn't feel the same way as we do, because they live in this more sort of equitable world. Now, the point is that the principle in development would say that talent is universal. I mean, a Nepali kid can become anything that they want, but the opportunities are not equal. So hence people travel from places where there are less opportunities to places where there are more opportunities, and that I think is the most natural thing that human beings have done throughout history. So having talent is one thing, but my children have found a way to use the internet, to use the connectivity, so to a point where for them location doesn't really matter. Yeah. So I'm saying this maybe not average because last 3 weeks my son and daughter-in-law went on a holiday to Singapore. Not an average Nepali, but this is the Nepal that people can strive for. Not too many Nepalese, not too many Americans who go to good university, right? So it's not like Nepal is unique in that sense either, because opportunities are not available to everybody anywhere. So we should be really appreciative, if we have that opportunity. So being talented is good, but having access to opportunity is not something that is available to everybody. So use it wisely. Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about like religion in Nepal?
Sure. And so on the walk, I'll show you, how this works. So the word religion is something that you should not use in Nepal. So if you use the word dharma, right? So dharma is a really nice word. Dharma is a really nice word because it basically tells you about your relation with the universe, right? And then how I fit into the laws that govern that universe. Now it could be at the spiritual level, it can be at the faithful level. But the word religion, tries to put something in a box, right? And in that box, there are good things and bad things. And so the word dharma is what Nepalese prefer to use. But if you say, what religion are you in? In Nepal, it's almost illegal to ask that question. Even in the national census, you cannot ask people what your religion is. And so that is the beauty of being a secular society, is that you can have your faith, but you don't need to disclose it, even in the national census. But on the way, on the walk, I'll show you how the Vaishnav, the Saivik, the Buddhist, everything fits in. Yeah, through iconography. So it's all out there. But that's a very good question. But remember, if you ask Nepalese, dharma, then you'll get a really good answer. But if you say, what is your religion, they'll probably shy away from it. Because religion is not something people understand very easily. But dharma, they understand. I think this is true in the whole of South Asia, right? Dharma is the most.
But in India, we do have to write like religion.
Well, even the census.
Not in the formalities also. Okay.
So now you don't need to fill out an immigration form in Nepal, but when you did have to fill out an immigration form, one of the few countries in the world that says male, female, and others. We always had male, female, and others. And now we've just done away with the form, so it's gone, but others. So I think this country does get a lot of things right. Yeah.
Do you have a problem with misinformation?
So now misinformation as in, so let us say for example, the current street demonstration, So one is trying to, basically, I would say establish a republic, as a way forward, and the other is saying the republic is not working, so we need the king back. Right? So you can imagine if you turn on your, any media form, it's going to give you a lot of information on both sides. But to think that in today's world that you can actually fool people, wouldn't work. Right? So meaning, people can say, there were huge advantages of having a king, and then somebody is going to, really come after you, and say that's simply not true. I mean, Nepal under the kings didn't do very well. Now, the Prime Minister made a statement, about the founding king, that annexed the Himalayas into one big country. So because we were talking about this, and so this king who ruled, so up to the time of 1769, when Nepal was being annexed. So everybody knows throughout history that if he had not annexed Nepal, then maybe we would not have been able to fight the British. Right? And so when the Prime Minister tried to challenge the role played by this king, so there's a huge backlash, against the Prime Minister right now, because that's history. Some kings did really well. So I think, if you keep it open, right? If you keep the media open, I think you do get a balanced version. But what would be really dangerous, like in the old days when the state controlled the information, then that would be dangerous. So control would be bad. But free flowing, fake or not, I think it's good. As long as people are able to challenge it, come to some consensus. But this is the perfect example of this morning. And this is the Prime Minister trying to challenge, the role played by this king in 1769. And a lot of young people are actually pushing back. I think free flow is what we want.
I see.
Yeah. Not one way or the other. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was kind of curious about how like the forest coverage has come back, but the kind of population seems to have grown, and how like farming and that's like how that's been managed. That seems to be.
Yeah. So when you think of agriculture, right? So when you think of agriculture in the mountains would not survive without forest. And so all the foliage, all the fodder that you need for your livestock, so it will all come from the forest. So having realized this very early, so we integrated forest and agriculture into one. And so it's not two separate things. And so today, out of 45% of Nepal being forest cover, 14% is community managed forestry. So communities manage 14% of Nepal's area. Why? Because the forest is the source of water, the forest is the source of foliage, the forest is the source of all the manure that you need. So everything is forest, and so agriculture actually becomes a small part of it. And then fuel was the big deforestation aspect, was fuel. And so by providing alternate energy, right, so the need to chop down trees for fuel had to be made redundant. So imagine 75 years ago, only 2.5% Nepalese had access to 220 volt electricity. Today, take a guess, how many Nepalese have access to 220 volt
Guess
in 75 years?
I would guess 90.
Yeah, very good, 96. 96 and good quality 220 volt. So in India, across the border, they don't get 220 volts, right? In Bihar, UP, 140 volt. So a lot of industrial manufacturing actually moves across the border to take advantage of this
So
good
what,
strong air.
like fuel changed. Like what-
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so when the fuel change, the need to chop down trees for fuel, which is a big part of the equation.
Yeah.
And then if you just go into the forest occasionally for agriculture or for livestock, it is actually sustainable. Because if you're lopping the tree only for fodder, it doesn't kill the forest. In fact, Californians should learn that if you want to prevent forest fires, you better go into the forest more often and collect more forest products so that it doesn't burn every year. Yeah, it's just a way that people need to learn about these practices. Yeah.
I have a question. Two questions. When I came here, I thought, why are there no traffic lights?
Ah.
And then also,
Then
I
you saw
thought-
one.
Huh?
Then you saw one.
Did you see
Oh, I
some?
did
No,
see
here?
some when we came here. And I thought it was, honestly, I thought it was kind of cool that, I feel like most people use motorbikes. And I was wondering if that releases less carbon than cars, because I feel like,
Yeah.
yeah.
So just let's go to the carbon first. So today in Nepal, the growth segment, right? So Nepal has declared itself carbon neutral by 2045. And so when the Prime Minister or others give the speech, it will always be followed by a qualifying sentence, which is 5 years before the rest of the world. Nepal takes pride in this thing. And the way we are doing it is 4 sectors. Right? So cooking is being decarbonized. So when you go to homestays, always check the kitchen and see how the kitchen is being decarbonized. So transportation is being decarbonized, agriculture is being decarbonized, and industry. So these are 4 sectors. And so how are we doing this? So with transportation, so if you import a fossil fuel vehicle today, you pay 265% tariff. 265. For electric vehicles, you pay 15, and depending on the Tesla or the high wattage, it's 65%. So 15 to 65 on electric vehicles, and 265% on fossil fuel. So that's why you'll see a lot of electric vehicles on the street. Now the second part about traffic lights is that, so this is one of those countries in the world where the car came before we had roads. So you can imagine the initial cars were actually carried on people's back when they arrived in Nepal. So, this is like like the chicken first or the egg first. But in Nepal, when you ask this question, why are there no traffic lights? So everybody will tell you something very simple, that traffic laws are only a suggestion. It's up to you to. It's a suggestion. And you'll see this all the time. You want to take it or not, it's up to you. It's a suggestion. So we joke sometimes, when we have meetings with the police and others, we say, the traffic lights don't work, right? Red, green, doesn't matter. So maybe what we need is a plastic cat to cross the road, because I'm sure the cat will stop more traffic than the red light. So instead of red light, invest in a cat, a robotic cat or AI cat. It'll work better, I think, culturally. Yeah.
Are you seeing results with the decarbonization and stuff?
So not only results, people talk about these things a lot, right? And so there's carbon finance, there is this finance, that finance. I mean, it's never happened. I mean, you can imagine the first, the UN conference I went to on environment was in 1990 to prepare for the Earth Summit, and I never went to another conference after that. Because I think, COP, I think stands for Conference of Polluters. It doesn't do very much. So the Nepalese, right? So the 45% cover, all this, is not happening because of some international commitment, right? So for Nepal, so if you go and so do this in the village when you are there. So ask the family, why did you switch to an electric vehicle? Why did you switch to a rice cooker, electric rice cooker? Why did you invest in an induction stove? Probably they'll tell you that we know what it means when India blocks those things. And so the motivation may not be carbon, it may be something more, security related. But in my home, we do this on purpose, that we have to reduce our reliance on imported fossil fuel. So carbon may not be the number one reason, for that behavior. And so look at all our buses, those green buses, all electric. Right? But yesterday, so when the budget came out, so this is how business works, right? So a lot of businesses imported electric vehicles, thinking that the government will raise the tariff on it, the excise on it, and the government didn't. Right? So what happens is you have businessmen who think they can, basically bribe the government, to increase the tax, and so you import and hoard. So this is very common practice, right? And the government didn't bow down to this, and so today electric vehicles are going to be very cheap. And then with charging stations, with 220 volt, with differential tariff, so this will grow. So when I say agriculture, for example, the whole idea is to replace diesel pumps with solar photovoltaic. And so the beauty in solar photovoltaic is you don't need to store the electricity, you're only storing the water. So daytime pumping. Right? And so when we say one day of good rain in Nepal, it's almost worth about 100 megawatts of pumping. So that's how much solar we could. So it works out. And then industry. So previously they would use diesel generators, like coal. So now we're giving them this high voltage direct dedicated lines, and then also encouraging what we call co-generation. So even like a sugarcane factory, so a lot of the waste that would generate is actually going into the thing to generate power, and then a simple mechanism called net metering, where the electricity that they do not consume is sold to the grid. So and this is now in Kathmandu also, where we have put smart meters. So the rooftop solar, you can actually sell it back to the grid. So it's very proactive. Yeah. And, when you arrive in a country like this, so that's why, the questioning, how you frame your question will really make a big difference. So start with cows and buffaloes, cats and dogs. Yeah.
What would you say is like the one lesson that the world can learn from Nepal?
So Nepal, has taken a very different track, I think, in development. And so people like me or people like us, who write the Prime Minister's speech on, say, carbon, and you write this speech and you think, will you read this, right? So 2 weeks before the event, the secretary, I called the secretary and he said, yeah, it's fine. Then I call him like a week ahead, yeah, it's all good. So 2 days, and so finally the Prime Minister reads it and it becomes policy, right? So I don't think it's, the Prime Minister who is, doing a policy, it's me who's doing it. Now, if I become dishonest, then we have a problem. But the Prime Minister going to Scotland and saying Nepal will become carbon neutral by 2045, I wonder if he even knows what he's reading, right? So, these issues of where society goes is something dictated by people who actually understand the situation and guide it. Now, the lesson that world can learn is that, so there was a generation of Nepalese who thought that Nepal could develop the way a lot of other countries developed. Okay, so now without taking any offense, imagine if the Nepalese says we need to look like America. Right? The immediate question that will come is, so do we go to Africa and bring slaves? So can you draw the parallel? So then you got to take that part out, right? So if you keep on, so like for example, we need to become like South Korea. Okay, but then would you tolerate a dictator like Park Chung-hee? So minus Park Chung-hee, well, South Korea isn't very much. Right? So these kinds of conversations where you say we should be like, so it's all apple and oranges. And I think Nepalese society at least understands that oranges and apples are different things. And that we should not take this path of apple and oranges. So like China, why should we kill millions of people to develop? It just doesn't work. Or Modi is India, Hindutva. Can you base a whole political philosophy on Hinduism? So people are, at least in Nepal, we question these things a lot. And so that I think is giving us good direction. So we're not doing, carbon neutrality because of the world. We're doing it because it's the right thing to do. Because we have plenty of solar, because we have plenty of hydropower. So it's the right thing to do. It sounds, little, how to say, like almost like self-centered. But I think there are many parts of the world that we can all learn from about their own ways of bringing change, versus trying to emulate. So the biggest story we used to have as children was, so somebody would come back and say, now I know why the UK is so developed. And so say, how did they develop? I say, even small children speak English. Maybe. So you can understand, right, how development is perceived. So if you speak English, you are developed. If you don't speak English, you are not developed. So these things we need to change. Yeah, please. So this is good. This is and so as we walk, ask me as many questions. We're just going to stroll through the town.
So, like, I was kind of curious about the hydropower thing you're talking about.
Yes.
What, like, mechanisms are you, like, is like the country planning on like doing for that? And also, like, yeah, if you just speak on that.
Yeah. So Nepal has a gradient. Right? So this is the natural asset.
Yeah.
And every year when the monsoon begins, the monsoon gets deposited in the high mountains. And so the first question to you is, how many of those peaks are above 20,000 feet?
Probably
Most of them. So 250 of them above 20,000 feet. So that means they are perpetual snow. So how do Nepalese refer to their Himalayas? What do you think they call them? They call them water tanks. So we have these overhead water tanks, and so the water keeps flowing all year round, so which is a big asset. So utilizing that and the terrain, Nepal will not build a dam. Why no dam?
that hurts the entire country.
And because we have earthquakes.
Yeah.
So it's not a good idea to build dams where you have so many earthquakes. So what have we done? We've done basically run off the river. So run off the river means you take a bend in the river, you put a tunnel through, and only 40 to 60% of the water is actually allowed to be going through because you want to keep the natural flow going. And so in the last earthquake in 2015, 4 hours after the earthquake, the entire grid was back in operation because all our infrastructure is underground. So if you go on a site visit to see hydropower, you'll be very surprised. There's very little to see, right? But then there are past projects like Kulikhani is one, and also the Kali Gandaki. So you'll see dams. But all the ones that we are doing now, it's all run of the river. So when you do run of the river, what happens? Is during the monsoon you have plenty of water, and in winter the snow freezes, so you have no water. So what do you think is the solution to that? Build dams? So many people will suggest we need to build dams to store the monsoon water.
Yeah.
So Nepal opted to trade. So when we have a shortage we buy, and when we have a surplus we sell. And so the agreement with our neighbors is a real-time metering. So when Indian plains are very hot and the demand is very high, it's very expensive. So that's when we sell. And then when our demand is low, we buy. So trade is one of those amazing ways for you to actually make it redundant to have to build dams. And so today with investments, so if you think of like the coal or fossil fuel, so it is going down because of the 96% coverage. But also look at the world, how efficient appliances have become. So if you think of a 100-watt bulb replaced by a 40-watt fluorescent, got replaced by a 7-watt CFL, and then got replaced by a 1-watt LED. So if you use LED, look at this, that's 100 times more efficient than the whole incandescent bulb. Yeah. So on the one hand, you're having a lot of good clean energy. On the other hand, consumption has become very efficient. Right? And so we are using both of those. But the point is in the neighborhood, because the demand actually meets with supply. So meaning when the Nepali rivers are full, India is very hot. And so they need a lot of AC. And so because we are selling on real-time basis, it's actually good for us. So it's all these little nuances. It's not about like, okay, we need to build a large dam because that's what China did, or because that's what the Hoover Dam was about. So you should not take that route. But if you design it based on real variables, in that geography or in that location, then I think a lot can be achieved. So yeah, I'm sure in your geology, I think energy will become a big part, and so tunneling is a very important part of Nepali infrastructure. Will you be driving to Pokhara?
We're driving to Pokhara. They'll be doing field work along the way.
Yeah. So when you go to Pokhara, when you cross the Nagdunga, the hill just west of Kathmandu, so you'll see the tunnel now coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And so this tunnel will basically cut down like 1.5 hours of drive to 9 minutes. But then if you get the geology wrong, then it becomes very expensive. Projects get delayed for a long time.
From where to where?
From Thankot to Nagdunga.
That big tunnel.
Yeah.
So that whole climb and then the
It's
descent,
9 minutes.
9 minutes drive. It's good to see the expression on your face.
Yeah.
So geology rocks. Yeah, 9 minutes. So hydropower is the same. So dams, no, but tunnels, we will have more and more. And the whole idea is in a tectonic situation, you want to keep the infrastructure both low but also underground. So that, like for example, let's say glacial lake outbursts, right? So lake bursts, so the river has to flow freely. And if you have an obstruction, I think that will be more dangerous.